AI bias in recruiting has become a really hot topic of late, and as more and more tools are becoming available and more people can run their own processes, it's only going to get more critical to understand what decisions your AI tool is making on your behalf and how open you are to potential legal ramifications of imparting bias in the process. So today what we're going to do is take an imaginary process and look at a tool that has potentially been used to filter out candidates in a recruiting process and try to understand whether there was any bias in there and what we should do about it. It's on the learn.meanderhq website on our Talent Academy. You just go over to resources and you'll see we have a bunch of packets here. It's going to be one of the featured ones this week. So get on there, download the toolkit, and you'll be able to follow along with everything that we're going to do in this process. When you download it, what you'll find is that there's a starter kit that has a synthetic data set. This is going to allow you to actually run this process on an imaginary export of a HRIS. And we have our starter kit, which is a PDF, which is going to give you all the prompts that I'm actually going to use. And we're going to use Claude for Excel for this approach. I think it's one of the best ways to actually look at data within one tool and actually understand what's going on. Of course, use different chatbots. Just be really careful when you're uploading real employee data and make sure that you're doing it in a safe environment and you're not going to violate any PII laws. Let's jump into it. We'll take a look at what we've got here with our prompt pack and our CSV, which is going to be our Excel file. The first thing to note, and I've called this out a few times, is there's this ribbon at the top of our CSV file, which just reminds us that if we make certain adjustments to the file and keep it in a CSV format, we're probably going to lose those adjustments. So the safest thing to do before you do anything else is just save it as an Excel workbook. I've lost a lot of data in the past because I haven't done that first, so it's a good process to follow. What we're also going to do is then just take a quick look at this data set so we can understand where we are. And you can see we've got applicant IDs, names, dates, years of experience, and then we're using the skills match that the AI screening tool has been exporting, and then looking at the screen score and whether we actually shortlisted that candidate. And so what we're going to actually start to do is have a look to see if we can infer whether there's any bias in the process and how that's impacting our decision-making process as we're going through hiring for a certain role. Essentially, what we're going to do is follow this 4-question framework where we're going to set this hypothesis and say, okay, is this shortlist biased and should not ship? We'll assume that the shortlist is biased and we shouldn't be using this shortlist moving forward. There's actually a whole framework that we've set up in a new case approach. And so if you actually want to go deeper and you want to practice this a lot more, on our website in the self-study section, you'll see this new section called simulated practice. And what we're going to start to do is each week, we're going to release a new case, and that's going to give you an opportunity to test that theory in real time on simulated data and actually practice. They'll generally be 30 minutes to an hour depending on how deep we go. But what you can do is actually walk through the case, and it's going to give you frameworks. You've got all the exhibits based in here, and that's going to give you that opportunity to actually practice what we're doing on these YouTube videos, and you'll get some feedback as well. So in one of the attempts here, we scored poorly in analysis, quality, and synthesis, and we get this debrief at the end with an overall score. But I think what's really helpful here is that if there are weaknesses, you can actually click through and go to actually train further in the areas in which you need to kind of improve on. So that's kind of like a weekly rep just to stay current. We're about to release this, so this should be live by the time you watch this video. I'd love any feedback on this slightly new approach. I think it's a little bit better than just going through linear courses and trying to retain information that I'm delivering on a video like this one. So with that said, let's jump into the actual work that we're going to do here. So we're going to follow this hypothesis and 4 questions just as a framing. Let's assume that the shortlist is biased and we shouldn't use it moving forward. And with the hypothesis, we're going to test whether that is true or false. And we're going to do that by asking 4 different questions. One, is there a disparity? So we're actually going to look at this data set and say, is one group being selected at a higher rate than another? And critically, there's this 80% rule where if one group's rate is below 80% of the top group's rate, then we should flag that and actually follow up to see if there's anything that's driving that, because sometimes that can be one indication that there's bias in the selection process. Question 2 is, if we do see that, which spoiler alert, we're going to, do legitimate qualifications actually explain the reason for that? So, if we're selecting men at a higher rate than women, is it because the men have more qualifications? And we're going to see if that's actually the case. It's generally one of the biggest pushbacks you'll get if you see this in practice, And so we're going to be quite thorough here and make sure that we're accounting for all of the potential question marks that might come up as we're going through the analysis of this process. Question 3 is there a plausible mechanism? So when we actually look through the vendor documentation for this tool in particular, is there a reason that we might be seeing a different selection criteria that's being used compared to what we may do with a human reviewed process? And then question 4 is, are we actually obligated to act with any AI hiring process? The answer is almost certainly yes. Regardless of whether you have your own internal AI policy, there are laws like Local Law 144. A lot of these are focused on actual bias in the hiring process. And where they tie into AI is that AI may actually be imparting bias, which is why we're focusing on trying to understand what that could potentially be here and actually creating some kind of defensible recommendation about whether to use or not use certain tools. So the workflow we're going to follow, we're going to clean the data first. We're then going to actually compute all the metrics that we might need. We're going to check by hand and make sure that everything makes sense. Segment, decide, and then the final thing we always do is brief the decision back to the decision maker, whether it's the CHRO, the CFO, or whomever cares about this, potentially the hiring manager. We want some kind of defensible way to support the recommendation we're going to make moving forward. So let's jump straight in. We're going to go through these prompts. We'll cycle through them fairly quickly. You can obviously pause and run this yourself. But we're going to use Claude for Excel. So I'm going to load up this plugin here. Okay, so we're all set up in Claude for Excel. Now we're going to run the first prompt. We're going to see what we get. And so just talking through what we're doing here is we actually want to profile the data for quality problems. It's really important that whenever we're using AI to do analysis, that the first thing we do is actually clean the data set. Now, you could one-shot prompt it and maybe it's going to clean it for you anyway, but actually going through the process yourself and checking all the boxes will give you that confidence when you get to the end that you've actually done the analysis correctly and you can actually use the data that we've got to make recommendations that are supported by evidence. Okay, so we have our answer back. That took a couple of minutes for it to actually go through the full cleaning process. But note what we did here is we asked it to actually just analyze the data and don't fix anything yet, just report back to what was found. And so when we actually look at the data quality profiles, we can see we have some duplicate applicant IDs. So maybe people applied multiple times to the same role. Impossible values, this is 1 year of experience of 250. AI screen score actually caps at 98. So we don't see any scores of 99 to 100. So that maybe implies something that the tool is doing. Years of experience 0 appears 7 times, so maybe we're not actually capturing the actual years of experience, and that could impact how AI is scoring these candidates. Inconsistent date formats is a big one, and that's going to potentially impact those calculated fields that we might have. Stray white space is hopefully not so much of an issue because most tools should be able to handle that, but it's something to be aware of as we're thinking about cleaning the data. And then there is some missing data as well, which again may be impacting our AI scoring process. That's not really what we're looking at right now. What we want to do is figure out whether there's any bias in the selection process and what we should do about it. So let's create this cleaned copy. I'm going to create it in a separate sheet. It's always good to create a new version that's cleaned so that we can go back to the source data whenever. If we're ever modifying kind of a raw data set, I always like to have the raw data set to refer back to at any point in time. So we're now going to ask Claude for Excel to create a clean copy. It's a new sheet that's going to be called clean, and it's going to actually fix all of those issues that we found, and then we can actually start doing some analysis once we have that clean data set. Okay, so we have our clean data set back, and the final row count is 188 applicants. Let's just take a quick look to make sure that we do have the duplicate applicant IDs removed. So at 4030 Dimitri Mabeki, let's copy that person. And what we're going to do is actually just add a filter to our original source document and find that candidate. And we can see here we have two applications. Actually, the applicant ID is the same in here, but the scores were different. And then let's go to our clean data set and we'll run the same filter and we'll take a look at the same candidate. And now we just have one instance of that candidate, and we can see that the AI screen score here has been filtered. So the max screen score was 78.7, helper. Okay, so we have the data in here right now. And then let's just clear the filter and we'll see what we got back. So we have the final row count, 188 applicants, dates are displayed correctly. You can see they all match. Headers read correctly. We have the outlier notes. and everything. So I think we're good to go. But I think for the purpose of this demonstration, we'll go through to our next prompt. We'll get that kicked off. And so what we're doing here is we're saying on the clean sheet, we want to compute shortlist selection rates by self-reported gender. So this is actually starting to test the hypothesis that we have. Is like, are we selecting certain genders at a higher rate than others? And what we're going to do is now have the data based on this clean data set to actually support this hypothesis and actually understand a little bit more about what's going on. Okay, so we've got our first question data back, and let's expand this a little bit and take a look at what we're seeing. So, found a display bug. Okay, it's fine. I think we'll just look at the table and focus on this for now. So we've used clean here, so we have our table kind of baked in, so we can actually start to test this. So females, 4 were shortlisted from 70 applicants at a 5.7% selection rate. Male, 15 out of 71, so 21%. And then we have no gender reported and prefer not to say. So impact ratio of 0.27 really kind of fails that 80% test. So we do think there is a selection problem here, just at a very surface level. So we actually have to go a little bit deeper on here. One thing that we should actually do at this point, and we call it out in the prompt guide here, is run a COUNTIF statement here. And what this is actually going to do is look at our actual clean data set and figure out if we are matching what Claude for Excel calculated with what we can actually calculate using regular Excel functions. And so 5.7% is the selection rate of females, and we can see here it actually does match what's in here. So you see that Claude for Excel actually did just do the same calculations pretty much, and so we can be pretty confident that we have the right approach moving forward. So glaringly obvious problem here. Why is that actually happening? So the thing to actually just look at before we move ahead is this missing data. So we actually want to bound this. So we actually want to look at best case and worst case scenarios under reasonable assumptions, and maybe we actually split the applicants based on the applicant split that we actually did record data for, just to help understand what's going on there. And it's just going to give us a little bit more information to work with. So now we have the data back, and we can actually look. We'll look directly at the table in the Excel file to see what's going on here. So here we can see that we have 3 different scenarios for what potentially will have happened if we think about the candidates that we didn't capture gender data for. So let's say if we just use the baseline and assume that this is kind of correct, we got that impact ratio from earlier. If we assume that every undisclosed shortlisted candidate was a female and every undisclosed non-shortlisted candidate was a male, so best case scenario is still giving us a almost 0.8. Worst case scenario is actually the flip side of that, which actually takes our female rate down to 4%, so it's 0.16. And so if our reference data is 0.8, no, we actually still below the threshold, even in the best case scenario. And so that implies we're going to have to do something to actually understand that a little bit more. So let's go to the next stage, is actually look at whether qualifications might account for why we're seeing this difference in males and females. If you've ever actually done this analysis, you'll hear kind of a number of different excuses for why the selection may bias towards one gender. And what we actually want to do is get the hard data so that we understand exactly what's going on. Okay, so now we have additional analysis back. So let's take another look and see what's going on. So can we explain this selection bias based on qualifications or skills-based match band? So we're looking at the years of experience as a metric for qualification. And what we should see is that males should actually be more represented at higher years of experience, and that people within the same years of experience band will have the same EI score. So let's take a look, and we still see that there is a gap between male and female between the mean score of a female candidate and the mean score of a male candidate. That's at 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and 10 plus. And that includes this 999 score, which is obviously an error on the scoring part of it. But what we're seeing is there's consistently men are getting scored higher in this AI scoring process. And again, we can look at how many qualifications people have got. And again, we're seeing a huge gap. Actually shrinks a little bit as we get to the higher bands. But the bulk of our applicants are kind of highly skilled, but we're still seeing a huge disparity between men and women as they get selected. What we've done as the final part of this process is actually create a simple bar chart that just shows how many women were selected, how many men were selected, and what the 4/5 threshold would actually imply that the lower rate of selection should be in order to meet certain bias expectations. So what we now know is that somewhere in this process, there's some bias that is overwhelmingly selecting men over women for this position. So what we want to do is actually summarize that in a quick response that we're actually going to send up to a senior leader. One quick thing to call out is we do have this check by hand section. One thing that's always worth doing when you're going through this kind of analysis is not relying solely on the AI generated output, but actually go and check with some samples within the data set itself. Look at the clean data set, look at the original raw source data. Can you find examples of where you have two equally qualified candidates and the man is scored at a higher rate than the woman? What's really helpful then is also if you're going to create a slide deck and actually going to brief someone, you can actually show two candidates side by side. Say here's two candidates who are essentially equal with the exception of gender, and the AI scorer gave this one a 70 and this one an 80, and so we're actually making recommendations based on that. So actually have this executive summary concludes the AI screening tool is producing a disparate impact against female applicants not explained by qualifications and warrants immediate remediation. We have all the tables in the analysis to back this up. It just kind of goes through the whole process that we'd actually want to go through in order to kind of fix this. So, if I'm running this kind of RecOps team and actually looking at this AI screening tool, I'm instantly turning this off. I'm also going backwards to actually look through what happened in the past and did we actually make bias selections historically to the point where we may actually want to get legally involved at this point just to try and understand what our potential implication is going to be when we're actually inevitably going to face a lawsuit for using a tool that was imparting bias into the hiring process. It's something that everyone needs to be aware of if you're using AI at any point in the recruiting process. It's not saying that you shouldn't use AI, but you should just be aware of the impact it's having and actually be able to run these kind of audits to make sure that you're confident that when you're making the selections that you're not actually imparting bias. Again, not just because it's a legal issue, but because it's also going to impact the quality of the candidates that you're seeing come through. If you're excluding any candidate for anything other than their ability to do the role, you're not actually going to see the best candidates in your final round of interviews. So I hope that was helpful. If you do like this kind of video, please like, comment, subscribe. It's really helpful for me as I'm thinking through what to cover next. We are going to go through a lot of this on the paid section of the Meander Talent Academy. So if you do want to follow along, please subscribe to that. There's a bunch of free stuff on there as well. So, please just help yourself and we'll see you again soon.